The dog started again at 2 a.m. Elias Vance heard it through the walls, that low, compulsive scraping against frozen ground, and lay still in the dark, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom he hadn't bothered to furnish. Just a cot, a sleeping bag rated to -20, and a Beretta on the floor within reach of his right hand. That was enough. That was all he needed. The scratching continued. Methodical. Insistent. He'd been awake anyway. Sleep wasn't something Elias had anymore, not really. Sleep was where Kowalski came back, Petty Officer Second Class, Danny Kowalski. 26 years old, entry wound through the base of his skull, died in Elias's arms in a ditch outside Kandahar, while Elias radioed for a medevac that arrived 40 minutes too late. In the dream, Kowalski always asked the same question. "Why didn't you see it coming, Chief? You were supposed to see it coming." Elias sat up, swung his legs over the edge of the cot. The cold hit him immediately. The wood stove had burned down to coals, and the Montana wind was pressing hard against the single-pane windows, seeping through gaps in the log walls that he kept meaning to re-chink. Oakhaven. Population 340. Nearest gas station 11 miles east on Route 2. He'd picked it for exactly those reasons. He pulled on his boots, his fleece, and stepped to the window. Ranger was out there under the dead oak, visible in the pale wash of a quarter moon, reflecting off a foot of fresh snow. The German shepherd was on his front paws, digging furiously, throwing frozen dirt and ice shards between his back legs. His breath came in short white clouds. He'd been doing this the same spot, the same frantic energy for 3 nights running. First night, Elias figured a mole. Something under the snow. Second night, he stood on the porch and called the dog in. Ranger ignored him. A 70-pound working dog pretending to be deaf. Elias had gone back to bed. Third night tonight, he grabbed the pickaxe from the tool shed. The cold outside was a living thing. -14 Celsius by the thermometer nailed to the porch post. The kind of cold that makes your nostril hairs freeze with the first breath and turns the snow underfoot into a surface like packed concrete. Elias wore no gloves. He'd forgotten them on the kitchen table and couldn't make himself go back. "Move," he told Ranger. The dog stepped aside exactly 2 feet, watching with those amber eyes that always seemed to be evaluating him. Ranger had come from a SEAL Team 6K9 handler named Briggs, who'd rotated out with a knee injury. Briggs couldn't keep him landlord 2 kids' small apartment. He'd called Elias because Elias was the only person he trusted with a trained combat dog. That was 14 months ago. In those 14 months, Ranger had become the reason Elias got up in the morning. He drove the pickaxe into the ground. The first 3 swings were useless, just sparks off the permafrost crust. The fourth broke through. After that, the frozen earth gave way to something denser, older, packed by years, rather than just one winter. Elias worked steadily, not thinking, letting the physical effort clean out the noise in his skull. Swing and pull. Swing and pull. His shoulders burned. His bare hands had gone from painful to numb, which was fine. 2 feet down, the pickaxe hit something metallic. He stopped. Ranger had gone absolutely still, ears forward, every muscle in his body rigid with a working dog's attention. Elias crouched, used his hands to clear the remaining dirt and ice. His fingers found edges, corners, the seam of a lid. He worked the object loose from the earth. It was a military-grade lockbox, roughly the size of a hardback novel, aluminum construction, painted matte black underneath the rust that had bloomed across its surface. The kind of container you use to transport things that could not be lost. He carried it inside, set it on the kitchen table under the bare bulb. The lock was a 4-digit combination. He stared at it for a moment, then tried the only sequence that came to mind. 0317, the date of the Kandahar operation. The lock released. Inside, wrapped in a sleeve of oilskin cloth that had kept the moisture out for years, were 2 objects. The first was a dog tag, military-issue stainless steel, the chain corroded black. He lifted it to the light and read the name stamped into the metal. McAllister Thomas R. Tom McAllister. Captain Tom McAllister, his commanding officer, his friend of 9 years, killed in the same ambush that took Kowalski. Both men buried with full honors at Arlington. Elias had carried the flag at Tom's funeral. He had sat across from Tom's wife Sarah in the front pew of a chapel in Virginia and not been able to look her in the eye. The tag was stained with something dark and brown. Old blood. Elias's hand was shaking. He set the tag down and looked at the second object, a satellite phone sealed in a vacuum bag. He tore the bag open. The phone was powered off. He held down the power button, and after a moment the screen lit, charged, somehow still charged, as if someone had intended it to be found and used. He stared at it. Then it rang. The sound tore through the silence of the kitchen like something had been ripped open. Ranger's head snapped up from where he lay near the stove. Elias stood frozen, the phone vibrating in his palm, the caller ID reading only a string of zeros. He picked up. Vance. The voice on the other end was calm, familiar, a voice he hadn't heard in 5 years. I've been waiting for you to find that box. You always were slow. The kitchen walls seemed to close in. Took you long enough, said Colonel Raymond Graves. Elias didn't speak for a full 5 seconds. He stood in his kitchen at 2 a.m, a dead man's dog tag in his left hand and a satellite phone pressed against his ear. And he did what every SEAL learns in BUD/S. He controlled his breathing first. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. Get the heart rate down. Think before you move. You're dead, Elias said. Graves died in the Kandahar Review. Heart attack. I read the obituary. You read what I needed you to read. A pause, and Elias could hear wind on the other end, wherever Graves was calling from. He was outside. That box has been in the ground for 3 years. I put it there before I disappeared. Life insurance, you understand. For when I needed leverage. Leverage against who? Against whoever found it. Another pause. Turns out that's you, Chief, which is actually convenient. Because what's in that box belongs to me, and I want it back. Elias looked down at the oilskin wrapping. He'd assumed the tag and the phone were the only contents. He hadn't looked further. He unwrapped the cloth fully now, one-handed, and there it was, seated in a foam cutout beneath where the phone had rested. A thumb drive, military encrypted, the kind the agency used for compartmentalized field documentation. Black housing. No label. His stomach dropped. The drive, Elias said. Smart as ever. Graves's voice carried that old tone, the one he'd used in briefings, smooth and absolute, the voice of a man who believed consequences applied to other people. There's enough on that drive to make certain careers very uncomfortable. Men with stars on their collars. Men who lunch at the Capitol Grill and vacation in the Outer Banks. You hand it over, I disappear again, and you go back to whatever you're doing up there in the snow. Nobody gets hurt. You already hurt people. The words came out flat and cold. You sold the Kandahar op. You gave our route to the Taliban. Tom McAllister is in the ground because of you. Kowalski is in the ground because of you. 4 men dead because you made a deal. Silence on the line. You don't know what you're talking about, Graves said, and for the first time the smoothness cracked just slightly, just enough for Elias to hear the thing underneath it. Not guilt. Irritation. The irritation of a man who believes he made a hard calculation and resents being questioned on it. That operation was a liability. The intelligence was compromised from the Pakistani side before we ever stepped off. I managed the situation. You managed the situation. Elias heard his own voice go very quiet. You managed Tom's wife sitting in that chapel. You managed his 2 kids growing up without a father. Hand over the drive, Vance. Or what? Graves exhaled slowly. Or the men I sent to collect it will stop being polite about it. Ranger moved before Elias processed the words. The dog was on his feet in one motion, head swiveling toward the front wall, a growl rising from somewhere deep in his chest, not the playful bark he used for squirrels or the alert huff for deer passing the tree line. This was the sound Ranger made in Fallujah when Briggs's unit had cleared buildings. The sound that meant human threat, close multiple. Elias killed the kitchen light. The room went black. He crossed to the window in 2 steps, staying below the sill, and raised his head just enough to see through the lower corner of the glass. 3 of them visible from this angle, moving through the tree line in a staggered formation, tactical, spacing professional discipline. Dark tactical gear against the white snow. One carried something heavy on a shoulder sling. His eyes adjusted and identified it a breaching tool. They weren't here to negotiate. He swept to the side window. 2 more on the east flank. Red laser points swept across the snow, then climbed the log siding. 5 minimum. Probably more he couldn't see. The satellite phone was still in his hand. He could hear Graves breathing on the other end, waiting. "You should have kept digging," Elias said, and cut the call. He moved to the bedroom, pulled the go-bag from under the cot, assembled, and ready for 18 months, because old habits don't retire even when the man does. The Beretta went into his waistband. He grabbed the medical kit, extra layers the drive, and the dog tag went into an interior pocket against his chest. He was back in the kitchen in 12 seconds. The laser points were on the windows now, 4 red lines cutting through the glass and painting thin lines across the far wall. Elias pressed his back to the refrigerator below their angle. He looked at Ranger. The dog was crouched low, trembling with leashed tension, eyes locked on the front door. "Stack," Elias whispered. "The command for heel close." Ranger moved to his left leg immediately. The window above the sink exploded inward. Something dense and cylindrical bounced off the counter and hit the floor, spitting white sparks, a flashbang military-grade 3-second fuse already burning. Elias squeezed his eyes shut and opened his mouth to equalize the pressure. The concussion hit like a wall. The kitchen turned white behind his eyelids. His ears rang solid. He was already moving blind, one hand on Ranger's back to guide him toward the back door. He heard the shot. A single crack suppressed from the east window. Then he heard Ranger cry out. Elias's eyes came back, just enough shapes and light, no detail yet, and he saw Ranger had spun sideways and gone down hard against the back wall, between Elias and where the laser had pointed. The dog had crossed into the shot's path. "No!" The word came out of him like something torn loose. He got the back door open with his shoulder, and they fell out into the snow together. Ranger was moving, still moving, which meant alive, which was the only thought Elias allowed himself to hold on to. The dog scrambled on 3 legs, his right front leg folding under him every time he tried to put weight on it. Elias got an arm under his chest, and they moved into the tree line before the men breaching the front door finished their stack entry. The forest swallowed them. 30 yards in the farmhouse, lights disappeared behind the pine density, and the world narrowed to darkness, wind, and the sound of Ranger's labored breathing against Elias's neck. He was carrying the dog now, all 70 pounds of him moving on instinct, boots punching through the snow crust with every step. No trail, no fixed direction. Just away from the laser sights and the radios, he could hear crackling faintly through the trees behind him. He didn't stop until he found the creek bed. It ran shallow this time of year, half frozen, cutting a natural depression into the hillside. He dropped into it, used the bank as cover, and laid Ranger down across his thighs. His hands found the wound by feel in the dark high on the right shoulder. Entry wound, clean, no exit. He could locate. The round was still in there. The fur around the site was matted and warm, and the warmth was wrong. "Look at me," Elias said. Not a command, just talking. "Look at me, Ranger." The dog turned his head. His eyes found Elias's face and stayed there. Elias stripped off his fleece pullover. The cold hit his bare torso like a blade. He folded the fleece tight and pressed it hard against the wound, held it there with both hands, leaned his weight into it. Ranger made a sound, not a whimper, more like a long exhale, and his head dropped against Elias's knee. "Stay with me. You don't get to check out. You hear me?" The wind moved through the pines overhead. Somewhere behind them he heard a vehicle engine turn over. They were sweeping the property. They'd moved to the tree line next, use thermals if they had them, and 2 men, 1 injured, leaving tracks in fresh snow weren't hard to follow. He had maybe 12 minutes. Elias had done 3 combat deployments. He'd put tourniquets on men in the dark, in the rain, in the middle of firefights, where the noise made thinking impossible. He'd been trained to compartmentalize everything that wasn't the immediate task. You box up the fear, and you put it on a shelf, and you deal with the task. That's how it works. He couldn't box this. His hands were shaking. Hands that had held a long gun in a hide for 11 hours without trembling were shaking now over a dog's wounded shoulder in a frozen creek bed in Montana. And Elias Vance, who had not cried at Kowalski's funeral, who had not cried at Tom McAllister's, who had driven home from Arlington alone and sat in his truck in a parking lot for 2 hours and felt nothing but a cold, sealed numbness, felt something break open behind his sternum. He pressed his forehead against the top of Ranger's head. "I'm not losing you too," he said. His voice cracked on the last word, and he let it. There was nobody here to maintain anything in front of. "You understand I am not losing you too." He thought of the medical clinic on the south edge of Oak Haven. Dr. Pierce's practice, mostly retired now, open 2 days a week, but the building was always heated and the supply closet stayed stocked because the county paid for it. Elias knew this because he'd spent 11 months learning every structure within 5 miles of the farm. Old habits. 2 miles south through the woods. Off-trail, no roads. In the dark, carrying an injured dog with men behind him. He stood up with Ranger against his chest and started moving. The clinic door gave on the second kick, old wood frame, single deadbolt. Elias got inside, got the door pulled shut behind him, and laid Ranger on the examination table under a surgical light. He clicked on low. The supply closet had what he needed. Gauze irrigation, saline hemostatic bandaging, lidocaine suture kit. He worked fast and he worked quiet, and at some point in the middle of it, he realized he was talking the whole time, a low, steady stream of words, telling Ranger about the morning they'd gone fishing on the creek last July, about the time the dog had chased a pronghorn antelope for a quarter mile, and come back absolutely baffled that it had outrun him about nothing, about everything. The bleeding slowed. Ranger's chest rose and fell, shallow but steady. Elias allowed himself 10 seconds. He sat on the floor with his back against the cabinet, his blood-smeared hands on his knees, and looked at the ceiling and asked whoever was listening to let the dog live. He hadn't spoken to God in years. It felt awkward and necessary, and he did it anyway. Then the overhead light of the clinic came on full. "Don't move." A woman's voice. Law enforcement, flat, the tone that's been trained into the reflexive calm of someone who has pulled a weapon before and knows exactly how it ends if the other person makes the wrong choice. Elias raised both hands slowly. The sheriff's badge caught the light first. Then the face above the gun barrel registered, and the floor seemed to tilt under him. Sarah McAllister, 5 years older. A hard grief in her face that hadn't been there before. The weapon was level and her grip was good, and she was looking at him like he was something she'd waited a long time to find. "Elias Vance," she said. "You're wanted on federal charges, treason and conspiracy in the deaths of 4 servicemen." Her voice didn't waver. "Including my husband, Sarah." He kept his hands up, kept his voice level. "I know what you were told. I know what the file says. Everything in that file came from Graves." "Graves is dead." "No, he's not." Elias moved one hand slowly, 2 fingers only, to the interior pocket of his jacket. "I'm going to reach into my pocket. I'm not drawing. What I'm pulling out is why your husband buried that box under my oak tree. Tom never set foot on your property. He did. Once. 3 years ago, before Graves had him killed. Tom knew what was coming. He needed someone to find it who wouldn't hand it straight to the agency." Elias paused. "He chose me because he knew I'd never stop being angry enough to use it." Her eyes didn't move off him. The gun didn't move either. But she hadn't fired, and a woman with her training and her grief could have fired twice by now if that's what she'd come here to do. He pulled out the dog tag first. He held it up in the light chain dangling from his fingers. Sarah McAllister's face did something complicated. The professional mask stayed in place, but underneath it something shifted, a small tectonic thing, the kind of movement that happens before a structure either holds or comes down entirely. "That's not," she started. "Oh, 317, Elias said. "The combination on the lockbox. That was the date of the Kandahar op. Tom set the combination. He's the one who buried it. I didn't know until tonight." He set the dog tag on the examination table beside Ranger's front paw and pulled out the thumb drive next, held it up the same way. "There's a laptop in your cruiser," he said. "Standard issue Sheriff's Department. I'm asking you for 3 minutes. That's all. 3 minutes and you watch what's on this drive, and then you do whatever you decide to do." 20 seconds of silence. The wind pressed against the clinic windows. Sarah crossed the room, took the drive without lowering the weapon, and backed toward the door. She was gone for 4 minutes. When she came back, the gun was at her side. Her face was the face of someone who has just watched their world get rebuilt from the foundation up, and it was not a peaceful process. "He filmed it," she said. Her voice was stripped of everything, the law enforcement tone, the controlled anger, all of it. What was left was raw and exhausted. "Graves filmed the briefing. He's on camera giving the route to the intermediary. Tom is on camera figuring it out mid-meeting. Tom must have copied the file before Graves knew he had it. And then Tom came to you. He came to my property. I wasn't there, I was in Billings at a VA appointment. He must have buried it and left. 6 weeks later, the official report said he died in a training accident." Elias looked at her steadily. "There was no training accident." Sarah sat down on the metal stool near the supply counter. She sat like the air had gone out of her. She looked at Tom's dog tag in her hand, the one she'd picked up from the table without realizing she'd done it, and she closed her fist around it. 5 years, she said. "I know. I believed them. I stood there, and I believed every word, and I let them fold that flag, and I thanked the men who—" She stopped, put the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment. Then she straightened. Okay. What do we do? We get Ranger stable enough to move, we take your cruiser out on the county road heading east, and we get that drive to someone outside the agency chain. I know a contact at the FBI field office in. Every window in the clinic went white simultaneously. Not lightning. Vehicle lights, high-powered multiple sources flooding through the glass from 3 sides. The sound came a half-second later, diesel engines heavy more than one. And underneath that, the metallic clatter of a battering ram being readied. Ranger's head came up off the table. Even wounded, even with lidocaine running through his shoulder and a bandage taped across his chest, the dog raised his head and his nostrils worked the air, and he looked directly at the front door with those amber eyes locked and burning. Sarah was already on her feet, weapon up, moving to the side of the window. I count 4 headlights, 2 vehicles, 6 men minimum. Service exit. Elias scanned the room. Storage room in the back. Maintenance hatch under the stairs leads to a crawl space. I did a building survey last year, county ordinance. Elias gathered Ranger from the table, jaw set against the dog's whimper of pain. Go. They moved through the storage room in the dark, Sarah navigating by memory. Elias 3 steps behind, with Ranger against his chest. She found the hatch, got it open, and the cold rushed up from below. The front door of the clinic came in. Not a knock. Not an announcement. The full frame buckled inward with a sound like a rifle shot, and boots hit the floor, and voices barked room-clearing commands in the clipped mechanical cadence of men who do this for money rather than country. Sarah dropped into the crawl space. Elias lowered Ranger down to her and followed. Above them, through the thin floorboards, the boots spread through the clinic. Then Graves's voice, smooth, unhurried, utterly certain of the outcome. Find them, and bring me the drive, not the man. A beat. The dog and the woman you can leave. Elias felt Sarah's hand find his arm in the dark. He felt the drive hard against his chest. He felt Ranger's heartbeat under his palm, steady and stubborn and alive. Then the ceiling above them cracked as something heavy shifted, and a cascade of plaster dust sifted down into the crawlspace, and Graves's voice came again, directly overhead now. "Vance, I know you're under me." A pause, almost conversational. "Come up with the drive and I walk away. Everyone lives." His boot hit the floor once, twice. "Or I start with the dog." Elias came up through the hatch with his hands raised. No weapon. Nothing in his grip. He stood in the wrecked clinic under the full glare of the tactical lights Graves's men had mounted on the walls, and he let them see exactly what he was: a man in a blood-streaked shirt, bare-handed, standing alone. Graves was 6 feet away. He looked older than the obituary photo. Thinner through the face, gray at the temples, but the eyes were the same eyes Elias had watched across a dozen mission briefing tables, flat, and calculating the eyes of a man who processed people as variables. He was dressed civilian, no insignia, but he carried himself the way command authority never fully leaves a person, even when they've burned everything else down. 4 armed contractors flanked the room. Professional spacing. Nobody with a finger inside a trigger guard yet, because Graves liked to finish conversations. "The drive, Elias. Sarah and Ranger walk out of here first." "That's not how this works." "Then we stand here until it is." Elias kept his voice flat. "You need that drive more than you need me. Arrest warrants fabricated. You can't hand me to actual FBI without the investigation going sideways on you. You need the drive destroyed, and you need me quiet, so make the trade." Graves studied him for a moment. Then he smiled, not with warmth, with the satisfaction of a man who has already decided and is enjoying the moment before the other person finds out. "You know what your problem always was, Chief." He took one step forward. "You still think this is a negotiation." He looked past Elias's shoulder and nodded once. Elias spun. One of the contractors had moved to the hatch and was pulling it open. Elias crossed the room in 2 strides and hit the man at the shoulder, driving him back into the wall, but the hatch was already open, and a second contractor had his weapon trained down into the darkness below. "Sarah, move," Elias started. "Nobody move," Graves said, and the room went still. He had his own weapon out now, pointed at the center of Elias's back. "Put him on the floor." 2 contractors pulled Elias off their man and forced him down to his knees. His cheek hit the cold linoleum. He could see the hatch from this angle, the dark rectangle of the opening. The contractor crouched over it with a weapon and a flashlight, cutting down into the crawl space. "Empty," the man reported. "They moved through. There's a ground-level vent at the far end." Graves exhaled through his nose, controlled irritation. He crouched down in front of Elias, put one hand on the floor for balance, and looked at him at eye level, the way a man examines something he's trying to assign a value to. "Where is she going with it?" "I don't know. She has no jurisdiction outside this county. The moment she crosses the line on a federal matter without clearance, I bury her career so deep her pension disappears with it. The drive requires a chain of custody authentication, a prosecutor with the footage of you on camera selling out an American Special Operations team," Elias said. "I think the queue moves pretty fast for that one." Graves stood up. He was quiet for 3 seconds. "Burn the building," he said to the room. "We'll relocate." Ranger came through the front door, not the hatch. The front door, which had been breached off its frame and was hanging at an angle, the gap wide enough for a determined 70-pound shepherd to push through with his good shoulder. He came in low and fast, and absolutely silent. No bark, no warning, the way trained K9s work when the situation is past the point of warning. He crossed 8 feet of open floor and closed on Graves's gun hand before any of the contractors registered what was moving. The weapon discharged into the ceiling as Ranger's momentum took Graves sideways and down. Elias was off the floor before the plaster stopped falling. He hit the nearest contractor, got the man's weapon arm up, and useless drove him back. The second man moved, and Elias rolled clear, came up on the far side of an overturned equipment cart. The room was chaos for 11 seconds. When it settled, Graves was on the floor with Ranger standing over him, three-legged, bleeding through the bandage on his shoulder, but standing. Chest heaving, teeth showing, every ounce of what he was pointed directly at the man underneath him. Elias picked up the loose weapon from the floor. He looked down at Graves. Raymond Graves, Colonel United States Army retired, who had sat across from him in a briefing room in Kandahar and shaken his hand and sent him and his brothers down a road that had been sold to the enemy before they ever stepped off. The contractors had gone still, one weapon down, three now reassessing the math of the room. "Tell them to put their weapons on the floor," Elias said. Graves said nothing. Ranger took one step forward. "Floor," Graves said. The word came out stripped of everything it had ever been dressed in. Just a sound from a man on his back. The weapons went down. Elias took the zip ties from the nearest man's vest. They all carried them and worked through the room. He was almost done when the support beam above the back storage room groaned. One of the tactical lights had been mounted against a drywall partition, and the heat from it had been climbing for 4 minutes. The partition went first, then the storage shelving caught, and the fire moved into the ceiling space with the speed of something that had been waiting. "Get up," Elias told the contractors. "Front door, move." They moved. He let them go. They were hired guns, not true believers, and none of them had signed up to burn. Graves he left zip-tied to the base of the examination table, which was bolted to the floor. He turned back for Ranger. The beam came down without sound, no creak, no warning, just the sudden weight of a burning 6-inch oak timber dropping straight through the weakened ceiling, and the crash when it hit brought half the ceiling section with it. Dust and debris and heat bloomed outward, and Elias threw his arm up against it, staggering back toward the door. He couldn't see Ranger. He couldn't hear him. The smoke was already pulling at the ceiling thick and black, and the fire had found something structural in the back wall, and the sound it made now was the sound of a building deciding it was done. "Ranger." Elias moved toward the debris pile, toward the last place the dog had been standing, and the heat pushed back against him like a wall. "Ranger." Nothing. Elias went in anyway. That was the only decision available to him, and he made it without deliberation, the way you make the only decision that exists. He pulled his shirt up over his nose and went into the smoke low below the worst of it, moving toward the debris pile on his hands and knees, with the heat pressing down on his back, like a hand trying to flatten him into the floor. He called Ranger's name and listened. The fire was loud now, not crackling, not the campfire sound people imagine, but a deep and structural roar coming from the back wall, where something load-bearing had fully caught. The ceiling above him ticked and groaned. He had maybe 90 seconds in the building before the math turned absolute. He swept his arm through the debris, broken plaster insulation shards of the ceiling beam. His bare hands found the edges and shoved them aside, burning on the hot surfaces and not registering it. A section of drywall. A collapsed shelf unit from the storage room displaced by the initial fall. And then under the far edge of the shelf unit, he felt fur. Ranger was on his side, conscious. His head came up when Elias's hands found his ribcage, but pinned under the outer edge of the collapsed shelf, which had fallen at an angle and created a small pocket of survivable space above him. The beam had missed him by 8 inches. The shelf had saved his life by pinning him low and away from the worst of the falling debris. Elias got his hands under the shelf edge and lifted. His shoulders, his back, every muscle that had ever been trained or tested went into it. The shelf was oak construction, heavy hardware loaded with what remained of the medical supplies that hadn't burned yet. It moved 4 inches. 6. He got a knee under one end and heaved, and the shelf rolled sideways off Ranger with a crash that sent a column of sparks spiraling toward the ceiling. He gathered the dog to his chest. He stood up into a wall of heat and smoke and moved toward the front of the building. By memory, he couldn't see the door, couldn't see anything, counting his steps, keeping low. One arm wrapped around Ranger, and the other arm out in front of him until his fingers hit the broken doorframe, and then he was through it out into the cold Montana night, 15 feet from the burning building, before his legs gave, and he went down on both knees in the snow. He set Ranger down in front of him and put both hands on the dog's face. Ranger looked back at him. His breathing was ragged and shallow. The bandage on his shoulder had come half loose. He had debris dust in his fur and a long scrape across his muzzle from the falling shelf. His tail moved once against the snow, a single slow wag, and then he leaned his full weight against Elias's chest and stayed there. Elias wrapped both arms around him and didn't say anything. Behind him, the clinic made a sound like a long exhale, and the roof section over the back room came down in a shower of embers that rose into the black sky and drifted and went out. Red and orange light painted the snow in every direction. Sarah was at the tree line 30 yards out, her radio in her hand, and she ran toward them the moment she saw them clear the building. She skidded to her knees in the snow on Ranger's other side, and her hand went to the dog's neck to check his pulse, and she looked up at Elias with an expression that had no name for the relief and the exhaustion and the long overdue ending of something terrible. "I got through to the FBI field office in Billings," she said. "Assistant director named Cho. She's been building a case on Graves for 8 months, suspected corruption in the agency's Afghan contractor network. She said—" Sarah stopped, pressed her lips together. "She said Tom's name was already in the file. As a potential witness they never got to." Elias looked at her. "She's sending a team. 2 hours." Sarah held up the drive. "With this, she says she can move on everything by morning." Graves went into federal custody at 4:17 a.m., zip-tied to a salvaged examination table in the snow outside a burning building in Oak Haven, Montana, which was not the ending he had planned for himself. 3 of his contractors cooperated immediately. The other 2 were taken into custody without incident by Cho's team when they arrived, headlights cutting through the pre-dawn dark of Route 2. The lead story on the national morning broadcast ran at 7 a.m. Eastern. By noon, 2 sitting officials in the defense contractor oversight chain had retained lawyers. By end of day, the Pentagon had announced a formal review of the Kandahar operation records. Captain Thomas R. McAllister and the 3 men of his team were officially exonerated 41 days later in a ceremony that was covered by 2 national networks and attended by the Secretary of Defense. Sarah sat in the front row. She wore Tom's dog tag around her neck. Elias stood at the back of the room and watched. 6 weeks after that, on a Thursday morning in late